Hello and welcome to another episode of Curious Collections, where we take you into the stacks to explore the interesting, unusual, and downright curious information available right at Benson Memorial Library. Today's episode is based on a true story that was told in the local papers in the 1890s. A rather sensational tale of death, lies, poison, and rumor. Our story begins in July of 1892, only a short month after the Great Fire and Flood of Titusville had destroyed a large portion of downtown and claimed over 60 lives. At the offices of the Titusville Herald, which had just narrowly avoided flooding, the July 26th edition of the paper stated that a John Crecraft of Greytown, roughly 2.5 miles out of Hydetown, had passed away suddenly the day before, leaving behind his wife Emma and an adopted daughter. From accounts given by both Emma Crecraft and a neighbor who was present that day, we can piece together the facts of what happened the morning John Crecraft died. Around 6 a.m., Emma Crecraft woke up and found John huddled near the kitchen stove, apparently shivering. She asked him what was the matter, and he said he wasn't well. She tried to help him up so he could lie down on a couch in the next room when he fell to the floor, saying, "Emma, I'm dying." He fell unconscious, and she shouted for help. Marvin Newton, a gentleman who boarded at the farm, came in and helped her make John comfortable on the floor, and shortly afterwards a neighbor, Sylvester Bromley, arrived and was sent to fetch the doctor. In the meantime, Mrs. Crecraft and Mr. Newton were able to get John conscious again, and he asked for his mother to be sent for. He would have convulsions periodically, but in between was apparently in possession of himself. Mrs. Matilda Crecraft arrived from her home in Newtontown around 8 o'clock. John told everyone in the room goodbye and died not long afterwards. The elder Mrs. Crecraft actually told Emma she was a fool for sending for the doctor, since John had had heart issues since he was young and had obviously died of heart disease, and so was wasting an expense. A Dr. Diffendorf arrived after John had passed, did a brief examination, and after speaking with Emma and Matilda Crecraft, ruled the death as heart failure. John Crecraft was then buried at Newtontown Cemetery. Shortly after John's death, rumors began circulating around town. Emma collected a sizable life insurance policy on John after his death, and people speculated on the nature of the relationship between Emma Crecraft and the boarder Marvin Newton. Had they actually been lovers and they'd had John put away? The rumors were loud enough that the newspapers got wind of the story and printed some serious accusations. In May of 1893, the Butler Citizen paper printed that Emma Crecraft and her lover, Marvin Newton, had poisoned John Crecraft for the insurance money and had run off together to Ohio. Emma denied this loudly and actually threatened to sue the newspapers for libel. The damage had obviously already been done. Several concerned citizens banded together and traveled to Meadville to speak with the district attorney, Wesley Best, about opening an investigation into John's death. District Attorney Best and Coroner J.W. Hannon did look into the case, and new rumors exploded saying that John Crecraft's body had been exhumed and poison found in his stomach. Another article later in May stated that the official word was that there had been no new developments in the case. In actuality, the district attorney and the coroner were arguing over whether or not an exhumation was worth the cost, with the coroner's opinion being that there was little point in doing one, since it would be difficult to obtain any hard evidence of poisoning so long after John's death, and that the cost to the county would be considerable given this was only following up on a rumor. The district attorney continued his investigation, however, and in June warrants were sworn out for the arrest of Emma Crecraft and Marvin Newton. Officer Moran of Titusville, who in a few years would become chief of police, arrested Emma Crecraft on June 25, 1893, at the house of her brother, a Mr. Anthill of Titusville. Marvin Newton was located in Jamestown, New York, and brought back by Officer Hall of Titusville. A hearing was held the next day, and charges were proffered that Emma and Marvin had conspired towards premeditated murder of John Crecraft by poisoning, and evidence was presented that Marvin Newton had purchased strychnine at a local Titusville druggist in the days before John's death. Witnesses were also presented that said they had overheard Emma admitting to killing her husband, as well as the fact that she had had an intimate relationship with Marvin Newton. News of the arrest exploded through the area. It's interesting to note that Lizzie Borden, the Massachusetts woman accused of murdering her parents with a hatchet, had gone on trial earlier in the month, and the local papers immediately linked the two together, saying that the Emma Crecraft arrest could be a second Lizzie Borden case. Rumors and speculations swelled in the time between Emma and Marvin's arrest and the date of the court trial, which was scheduled to begin on the 16th of September. On August 14th, John Crecraft's body was exhumed from Newtown Cemetery. In attendance were the district attorney, the county coroner, police chief McGraw, local detective Charlie Hall, and a number of hangers-on reporters. The casket was opened immediately, and the newspaper reported that the body was in a remarkable state of preservation. Several of Crecraft's organs were removed and placed in sealed jars, which were then delivered to a Professor Montgomery in the chemistry department at Allegheny College for analysis. Within a week, the paper was reporting that the analysis of the organs was complete and that a corrosive sublimate had been found in John Crecraft's stomach. Professor Montgomery was forced to take out his own ad in the paper, stating that he had yet to perform any examination of the organs and that when he did so, the results would go directly to his employers and no one else. Later that same month, a rather sensational report came out regarding a Sophronia Parker, the sister of John Crecraft. She told the papers that while she was out looking for evidence to submit to the trial proving that John Crecraft had been murdered, two strange men approached her, said, "That's her," and attempted to shoot her with a shotgun. She claimed that she was obviously getting too close to the truth and that someone was trying to keep her out of the way. She also said that she had been laid up some time with shotgun pellets in her leg. Newspapermen who attempted to speak to Emma Crecraft and Marvin Newton at this time noted that Emma was being unusually stoic and fully defended her innocence, while Marvin Newton was practically wasting away from nervousness. The opening date of the trial eventually arrived, and testimony took the better part of a week. The prosecution set out to prove that John Crecraft's symptoms that he displayed the morning of his death were obviously caused by poison. The neighbor, Sylvester Bromley, was asked to testify as to what he saw the morning of John's death, and two expert witnesses were also called to discuss the symptoms of strychnine poisoning. Another 2 days were spent calling forward witnesses who testified that they'd never known John Crecraft to be ill before, as well as reporting on suspicious activity from both Mrs. Crecraft and Marvin Newton, including a hired girl who claimed that she saw the two of them enter the bedroom together and lock the door, and a near neighbor of the Crecrafts who said he'd overheard Emma and Marvin talking when Emma said, "We can put it in the liquor, Marv. No one will ever know." Perhaps the most spectacular testimony came from Sophronia Parker and her husband, J.F. Parker. Mr. Parker claimed he'd been at the house of Mrs. Crecraft's brother, Mr. Anthill, when he'd seen her stand in front of a photograph of John and say, "I didn't mean to kill you, John, but I didn't do it alone." Mrs. Parker also corroborated this story and went on further to say that she'd overheard Emma and Marvin discussing poisoning John, and that between the two of them they'd had a large piece of white cloth, which turned out to be a shroud for him. At this point, the defense took over, led by renowned local criminal lawyer A.B. Richmond. Mr. Richmond first took on the expert witnesses, getting them both to admit that, while doctors, they had never attended a case of poisoning and thus weren't qualified to testify on possible symptoms. Two other witnesses were then produced to contradict the story of the hired girl, pointing out that at the Crecraft farm there was no door on the bedroom and thus Emma and Marvin would not have been able to close themselves in. Several people were called upon to point out that John Crecraft had been a heavy drinker over the course of his life, including the family physician, a Dr. Proper, who stated he had treated John multiple times for convulsions and delirium tremens, and that in May of 1892, when he had been called after John drank over a quart of liquor in less than 24 hours, he had informed John that if he continued to drink, it would kill him. Mr. Richmond then took a different tack and called multiple witnesses to the stand who testified that at various points over the last year they had been approached by Mrs. Sophronia Parker, who induced them to give testimony against Emma Crecraft. Another letter was submitted from supposedly written by Mrs. Parker and addressed to Dr. Proper, saying that if Dr. Proper testified for the defense, Mrs. Parker would tell all of Crawford County that he had been unusually intimate with Emma Crecraft at some point when he'd examined her. However, If he chose to testify that John had been poisoned, then the secret would go with her to the grave. And when the jury went out to decide the verdict, it took them 4.5 hours to come back with a final decision of not guilty on all counts. After the verdict had been rendered, the local paper had this to say: "The Crecraft murder case at Meadville ended last Saturday evening by the discharge of the accused, Emma Crecraft and Marvin Newton. Thus endeth a costly sensation, the result of a gossipy neighborhood and a newspaper reporter's vivid imagination." If you're curious about other true crime and trials that happen locally, you can check out the book Murders, Mysteries, and History of Crawford County from 1800 to 1956 by Don Hilton, which is available in the nonfiction section here at the library. Thanks for watching Curious Collections, and we'll see you in the stacks.